in general, when you think about it, there are at least 10 ways in which these new technologies actually exacerbate inequality. But here I want to really develop, I think Apar is absolutely correct. It's not technology, it's what we make of it. It's what we as a society and what our political economy chooses to do with the technologies, and if you like, how power plays into it. That is determining it, which means it's a social and political and policy choice, which in turn means that these are also things that can be at least undone or reduced. It's not like there's this tsunami coming that we can do nothing about, which is often how it's presented. Yeah, and typically when you talk about AI, for example, it's presented as this thing which is coming, which has no choice. Whereas, as Chandru has already indicated, a lot of that AI is actually being pushed massively. It is being created by states and large companies, actively forcing it down. I mean, every time you open any website, any program, you are forced to be confronted with this AI, whether you like it or not, right? That's a sign of the desperation of pushing certain types of technology rather than, it having a force of its own. So in that context, I mean, there are so many different ways, but there are at least 10 ways in which, in India, the whole process of digitalization has already contributed to inequality, and where it's likely, if it continues this way, to add even more to inequality. And the first, again, all of these have been mentioned, but let me just highlight again. The first is the digital divide, which everybody knows about. And Apar, I think, gave the numbers that are quite, I didn't even know this, that it had been stagnant for the last 1.5 years.
It's contracted somewhat.
Contracted, which tells you something about how, this access, and now to be a functioning citizen, you really have to have access. You can't manage anything now without access, which means you are forced once again into intermediaries who will have the access. So the poor are once again, being forced to do all kinds of other things to get the access. But I mean, Usha highlighted about how it has been so exclusionary. It's not simply the fact that not everybody has a mobile phone, but we saw during COVID, smartphones is what was being used, even in the villages, for teaching, so-called. And not only did many poor households not have smartphones, but in the ones that did, supposing there's only one, and there are 2 children in the house, and one of them is a female, we know what's going to happen to the access of the female. And we saw this play out across the country in terms of the impact on schooling and the de-learning processes, the de-skilling that occurred over that whole prolonged period when people were denied access to any kind of pedagogy except online. So there is, of course, the whole digital access divide issue, but that's been talked about so much, we're all quite familiar with it. And of course, the exclusion that comes with biometrics that Usha has highlighted so graphically, so I'm not going to talk about that. But there is also the other aspect of the inequality of data. And it's, what Usha mentioned, what Apar mentioned, it's so true that we are giving away all our data in a world where, in fact, we are getting less and less information from the government. So the second very big inequality is the inequality of information. The Right to Information Act is all but murdered. We are now unable to get even the most basic statistics. The ones like we have like a census, for God's sake. People across the world can't really believe it when I tell them that our last population data comes from 2011. But we do not have access to the most basic data, and those that we do have access to have often been doctored and manipulated to such an extent that they're barely believable. Okay, at the G20 meeting, our Prime Minister announced proudly to all of the present, all of the heads of state that were present, that India has a poverty rate of less than 4%, and we are the 4th least unequal country in the world, based on official data. So there is the inequality of data, which is again a very, very big thing, which is going to possibly get worse in the future, because now we know that the Shanti Bill, beautifully named Shanti Bill, will reduce our access to minimal data, even about all of the nuclear activities that are being carried out, including by private players and US players largely, that are going to be operating in this sphere, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, there's the inequality in the labor market that has come about, and again highlighted by the gig workers that Rajiv was talking about. But it's not only that. It is that there's a whole range of activities that are being eliminated effectively as employable activities, as opportunities for employment. And this has begun to hit in the software sector